Hey guys, welcome and ting and ting and ting. You know what I say? And I've watched videos about the potato farming and stuff in Ireland, and it's been pretty much straightforward. This has happened and this has happened and stuff like that. But I've never really watched one that say how it was done. So this one is called "How Britain Starved Ireland." So hopefully it gets into the how, the deep details of it, of how it happened. So let's go ahead and YouTube and simmer and see what's going on here.
This is a story about Ireland, and it's a story about an event that you've probably heard of, but might not know much about. It's usually called the Irish Potato Famine. In most history books, the Irish Potato Famine doesn't get a lot of attention. At most, it appears as a pretty simple story to explain Irish migration abroad. In the beginning, Irish people depended on the potato for food. Then there was a potato disease. Many Irish died, and others migrated abroad on what they called coffin ships to England, Scotland, Australia, and North America. But the story of the famine is a lot more complicated and a lot more disturbing than that. It was much less natural and much more artificial than you might think, and it all goes back to a man named Thomas Malthus. Malthus was a British economist, and in 1798, Malthus put forward an influential idea and a rather counterintuitive one. Malthus said that when food production increased, people were better off for a little. But that improvement led to an increase in population, which eventually caused societal problems. There were too many people and not enough food to go around. Poverty and famine were the natural results. Like animals, Malthus said, humans had a certain carrying capacity. When it exceeded that carrying capacity, enough people would die to return the population to a natural equilibrium.
Isn't it funny that he said that the word animals was used there? Of course, he wouldn't call his own people animals. He's got to pick another group of people to call animals. You know what I mean? That was a generalization. We like animals. But then what happened proved that they only see some people as animals, not all people as animals. You know what I mean? My kind is just fine human beings. Their kind is not human beings. They're like animals. And it's usually based on how somebody lived. And it's, if the person is different, they have different beliefs, a different political system, a different religious system. You know what I mean? And they use that to a certain extent to dehumanize them if they believe something different. And if it's something that other people don't understand or refuse to understand, it's easier to sway the people that you want to sway into justifying what you're going to do to that other group of people. You know what I'm saying?
So in the 19th century, that so-called Malthusian model became the conventional wisdom in European intellectuals. It led them to focus on what they called overpopulation and made them think of famine as nature reducing population to a sustainable level.
Oh, wow.
No serious economist today will tell you that having too many people is the reason people are poor or hungry. In 1981, the economist Amartya Sen explained the real cause of most historical famines. If you look at the historical record, Sen said, a collective lack of food is never the real problem. The cause of famines, while it often has something to do with a decline in agricultural production, is more related to the unequal distribution of food. There's enough food for everyone, but some people can't exchange what they have for that food. Sen found that famine is usually not the result of too little food, but of exploitation and unequal economic relations. Irish people were the other, against whom the British could define themselves. They were viewed as lazy, barbaric, barely human. Ireland itself was run as a colony for the emerging class of British capitalists. While England was rapidly becoming the wealthiest country in the world, Ireland was kept incredibly poor. The population was almost entirely composed of peasants. A large majority of all houses were huts made of mud. And the land those peasants lived on was owned almost entirely by absentee English landlords who never visited Ireland and extracted exorbitant amounts in rent. Even
which that's the prototype for what happened in the Caribbean or in Africa or other parts of the world, absentee owners, just exploiting it for their own benefits. And though there might not be slavery as we know it back then, and we do know slavery still goes on, it's still happening today. That is why the superpowers want to claim lands of people. This time, they're going about it differently to a certain degree by saying, using a specific type of system. That system is bad for you, so come to my system. And then they move in there, they put their businesses down there, whatever resources those places have, they use it up. You understand what I'm saying? And for their own benefit. You could see the same thing like what happened in Africa with China. Or in the Caribbean, where certain places are like rich in oil, how these outside companies come and they extract all the oil, and when the oil ran out, they just left, which leading a collapse of the society there as we know it, because the main source of income is gone. It's the same thing you could see for where I am here in a place called West Virginia, where the coal mines were very prevalent. Even when I first came to here in 1988, everybody was working in the coal mines. Everybody was making money. People were like with nice cars and all of that. Once that industry started slipping away, wow, total poverty set in. And most of the people who owned the coal mines were from outer states, so all that money went out of state. Same thing with all the steel plants and stuff. All of that went out. You know what I mean? And in some cases, I'm speaking of here, greedy politicians do that, because they start milking those people, the rich people. So, the rich people would pay them so they could keep the population under control. And of course, too, some of the locals made money off of it, so they got rich and they start owning stuff, you know what I mean? A lot of the politicians I've noticed here where I am, they're from outer state. People come from outer state and run for political office here. Now, whose interest are they in? Whose interest? Because they don't know the people here. They don't know the struggles that the people here are having. They just come in here to take as much as they can and run. You see what I'm saying and thing? It's crazy. And that's the same sort of thing that's going on here. You know what I mean? Because within good reason that there were local politicians within the leadership of that country that was in cahoots with them, because it's survival. They got a family to feed too, so they're gonna adhere to what the overlords were saying. You know what I'm saying? To keep their family fed.
the British government regarded these landlords with disdain, calling them, quote, the most oppressive species of tyrant that has ever lent assistance to the destruction of a country. So most Irish people were on a treadmill of extreme poverty. They were the most destitute people in all of Europe. In many districts, one government report found, their only food is the potato, their only beverage, water, a bed or a blanket is a rare luxury. And that part about the potato is especially important. Ireland has a lot of fertile soil and a topography that is ideal for grazing cattle. But when the British came in and colonized Ireland, they systematically took that land and used it to produce beef for the domestic English market. And so the economically poor Irish turned to the potato, a versatile crop that could be grown in large numbers on bad soil. And while the potato was adaptable, it was also really unreliable. There had been widespread potato failures pretty much every other year in the 19th century. And in the 1840s, a new potato disease, originally from North America, arrived in Europe. Huge potato crop failures sprung up in northern France, in Belgium, and in the Netherlands. But none of those places were as dependent on the potato as a source of food as was Ireland.
Oh.
So when the disease got to Ireland in the 1840s, the results were devastating. In 1845, about a third of the Irish crop was destroyed. By 1846, 75% of it was gone. Hunger spread rapidly, with unprecedented severity. This period became known in Ireland as Ondrachil, the bad life. But as Amartya Sen observed, this wasn't just about a pure lack of food. In fact, during the entire period of the famine, Ireland was continuing to export food out of the country. Enough cows, sheep, pigs, and grain were being shipped out of Ireland that could feed the Irish population twice over. But the British government refused to do anything about it.
And one of the ways I believe that they were able to do that is by, okay, so these people were already poor. They were already being oppressed by the landlords and stuff, the absentee landlords. So they kind of living in squalor as is. So as the blight start devastating the potatoes, the potato crops, things got worse. So they start living in worse conditions. So it was easy for them to go, oh, look at them. They're living in really horrible conditions like animals. They are animals. Come on, people, let's look at them. So it was easy to do that and to sort of deter people from looking at the real cause of why it's happening and blaming those people. It's happening today. You know what I mean? Like, let's say South America, for instance, okay? You have the banana trade there. Big companies go in, they buy out the banana tree plantations and start paying people less than. Bananas are, at the time, was like really important to the economy there. So once they sort of snatch that off from under the people and start exporting it all over the world and making a profit, and all the small farmers start losing their land to the rich people that come there and start taking stuff, poverty set in. With poverty setting in, more crime set in. And then they go, well, look at all the crime that they're doing down there. They're selling all these drugs and stuff. And that's wrong. But then it probably just started off as a way of survival. You know what I mean? They got to feed their family. And then when they try to come over here or to other parts of the world, well, these are criminals. Why are we letting them come here without actually paying attention to why some people have to do criminal acts? And I'm not condoning criminal acts. But if your family is starving, and you have no way of getting them food, you won't get desperate and do stuff. And I'm not saying all of them were like that. That's not what I'm saying. There's some greedy people that just want more and more and more, and they'll do stuff to get more. But you can't blame the whole population for, as you can't paint them as criminals without paying attention to the situation they're in. And it's usually they're going to blame the government of those places for the situation they're in, and in a lot of the cases, it is. But then whenever somebody come and said, okay, I'm for the people and I want to help the people, then the propaganda starts. They are communists, man. They this, they that, they the other. And they want to take our business from us and all of that. And then everybody is just following line going, hey, that's what it is. They're a bunch of criminals. They don't know how to lead the country. That's keeping them oppressed, even by their own people in some cases. It's just crazy. There's a lot going on that they know that the ordinary people who live in a country wouldn't know or understand or don't care to know, because in a way, they try to struggle to make ends meet themselves. They're not as in a dire situation as those people, but they're in a situation where they have to pay attention or they want to start starving too. So it's hard for us, the ordinary people, to start paying attention to, hey, wait, all around the world, we all having the same issue. Some may be worse than others, but the ones who are not having it as bad as the others, what they need to realize is that it could get that way for them. It could get that way for them.
Soon, the Irish began begging their British overlords for relief. And early on, the Conservative Party government, then the representatives of the old British aristocracy, had a fairly sympathetic response. They bought food from America and brought it to Ireland, distributing it to the poor. But in 1846, a different party, the Whigs, came to power in Britain. And the Whigs did not have the sort of aristocratic paternalism that the Conservatives had. They were advocates of a philosophy called Laissez-faire, the idea that the free market, left alone, would solve virtually any problem. So the person they put in charge of famine relief in Ireland was a man named Charles Trevelyan. Trevelyan had been a colonial administrator in India, and he was a big believer in those Malthusian ideas about population. He didn't really want to stop the starvation. He thought it was, well, necessary. The famine,
Natural
Trevelyan
selection.
said, was, quote, an effective mechanism for reducing surplus population. He said, it was the judgment of God that sent the famine to teach the Irish a lesson. The real evil, he said, is not the physical evil of the famine, but the moral evil of the selfish, perverse, and turbulent character of the Irish people. So Trevelyan's solution to the famine was to let it ride. The laissez-faire Whigs decided to change nothing. They refused to stop the movement of food to England and limited the amount of food they offered to the starving Irish people.
Wow.
The food that was being imported into Ireland was largely used not to feed the Irish, but to feed the cattle being slaughtered for British consumption. Even when they did offer some relief to the Irish peasants, they instituted moralistic tests, requiring that recipients live as indentured servants in a workhouse to improve their work ethic. The British even required that food only go to people who owned almost no land, forcing impoverished farmers to sell all the remaining land they had to their landlords, many of whom lived in Britain. And so, the famine only got worse. Diseases of hunger like typhus, dysentery, and cholera spread wildly, killing just as many people as the lack of food. Social structures broke down. Ordinary people turned en masse to begging, crime, prostitution. In Western Ireland, some resorted to cannibalism. The British, fearing a rebellion, sent army troops instead of food. As the news of the famine spread all over the world, shiploads of food finally began arriving. Americans from all strata generously sent money and food over the Atlantic, only to have their donations met with huge British cargo fees upon arrival. Even the Choctaw people donated to the famine relief funds, just a few years after they had experienced starvation themselves on the Trail of Tears. It was a beautiful example of international solidarity. But these donations weren't enough to stop the ruthless exploitation by British landlords. Even when enough food was being imported, it wasn't getting to the Irish people. Starvation and death continued. Impoverished Irish, with barely enough to eat, were evicted from their homes. One priest remembers the scene of a mass eviction. 700 human beings were driven from their homes in one day and sent adrift on the world to gratify the caprice of one who before God and man probably deserved less consideration than the last and the least of them. The horrid scenes I had then witnessed I must remember all my life long. The wailing of women, the screams, the terror, the consternation of children, the speechless agony of honest, industrious men, wrung tears of grief from all who saw them. By the time the famine began to end in the early 1850s, about 20% of the Irish population, 2 million human beings, had died of disease or hunger. Another 2 million had left for brighter shores. Today, Ireland's population is still lower than it was in the 1840s. But Ireland has never forgotten the famine and the generosity that some showed to them. During COVID, when the people of the Navajo Nation were hit hard, Ireland repaid their kindness shown to them during the famine by raising $2 million. And Ireland has never forgotten those who did not help them, the British government. and all those who valued profits over humanity. As the British historian A.J.P. Taylor would later write, the English governing class had the blood of 2 million Irish people on their hands. All Ireland was a Belsen. I'm Rory Duffy, professor of history.
Okay. That was a totally really good, succinct look at this whole situation here, this point in history. I think somebody suggested this to me too, if I'm not mistaken. Wow. That was a deep dive into that. Listen, man, I hope you guys learned something from watching this with me. And I'll leave a link in the description for this video so you could go check it out if you so wish. And y'all take care of each other, all right? Cool runnings.